Welcome to the Kennedy Report, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kennedy Hall. Archbishop Vigano is at it again. He has come out with, actually, it was an older interview that he gave, but he just released it through LifeSite News, speaking about how Archbishop Lefebvre was a holy man with great fidelity to the church and not a schismatic. Here's the article at LifeSite News. As I said, it's entitled Archbishop Lefebvre, excuse me, not a schismatic, but a holy man with great fidelity to the church. And this was actually given at a conference that he gave to university students in France in 2020. I think it was virtual because that's when everything was locked down. In any case, before we get to this, please like this video, subscribe to this channel, click the link in the description to see how you can help us continue to grow. You see things keep getting better here. We update all of our equipment. We keep looking more professional. This is because of all your support. You can support us by buying my books in the description as well. Visit the KennedyReport.com for more information on that. So, Archbishop Vigano says that Archbishop Lefebvre is not a schismatic, but a holy man with great fidelity to the church. And here's what it says. And this is from a Q&A session with Archbishop Vigano held at the conference, the end of a conference he gave at the Summer University Civitas on August 14th, 2020 in France. It says, "Dear friends, I'm happy to have been given the opportunity to participate in this edition of your summer university. It is a great honor for me to be able to offer my warmest greetings to the militants of Civitas, starting with your president, Mr. Alain Escada, the Secretary General, Mr. Léon Pierre Tourin, your dear chaplain, Father Joseph, as well as the capuchins of the resistance." He continues. By fighting for the reestablishment of the social reign of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by fighting against the Masonic oligarchy and against the Davos sect, Civitas finds itself like David against Goliath at the heart of the fight of the anti-globalist alliance that I have called for with all my heart. He continues speaking about the importance, etc., of everything. But then there is a couple money points that I want to get to here, where he actually goes directly into the question of Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. And we'll just bring that down here. It says, "Thank you, Monsignor. I ask a second question." This is the questioner. "What do you think of Archbishop Lefebvre and his struggle, particularly in his most controversial act, the Episcopal consecrations of 1988? This is the sticking point for a lot of people. A lot of people are totally willing to say Archbishop Lefebvre was justified, and the first part makes total sense why he did what he did as far as his resistance towards modernism is concerned. He was correct on what he said, but he should not have done the consecrations. Personally, I've heard arguments from people of goodwill who say things like, God would have found another way. Well, we could have said that about a lot of different saints. God could have found another way besides St. Joan of Arc. God could have found another way besides St. Eusebius of Samosate, who did something similar to Marcel Lefebvre. God could have found a way besides St. Athanasius, but he didn't. He just found the instrument that he chose to use. I believe Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre is that instrument, in this case at least. So what does Archbishop Vigano say about these consecrations? He says, "I can only look at Archbishop Lefebvre with admiration and much gratitude for his fidelity and courage, a courage and a fidelity that are unfailing in the face of so much adversity, hostility, and even relentlessness on the part of a hierarchy won over to the ideas of modernity and infiltrated by the Masonic supporters of a project of capillary destruction without precedent, the devastating scope of which we realize today in its extreme consequences." Key line there, without precedent. He says, capillary destruction without precedent. I think that's true. I don't think we have seen a level of destruction in the church to the degree that we see it now. There have been major bad times in the church. There really have been. But to the degree that we see today, I think this is unique. And this is not just my opinion. This is, St. Pius X called modernism the synthesis of all heresies. It's a super heresy. Think about it like an illness. If you have a cancer that you can isolate and you can treat, that's bad, but you can treat it. You have one illness. What if you have a synthesis of all illnesses? What if you have a super illness? How do you deal with a super illness? Well, to deal with a super illness, you need a super saint. when you're in a time of super heresy, of literally the synthesis of all of them, the worst possible heresy. Modernism is the worst possible heresy for many different reasons. If you're in a time of the worst possible heresy, and that heresy is in every level of society and of the church, then you're in the time where things are the worst they could possibly be from a strictly doctrinal perspective. This is, take the logic of St. Pius X saying synthesis of all heresies. What does that mean? It means super heresy, which means super bad time in the church, therefore super bad time. It's actually not, you don't have to be some sort of, conspiracy, quote unquote, rad trad to get to this point where you believe that we're in a terrible time. This is what the great Pope St. Pius X said. He put out numerous documents outlining how dangerous this was. This was foretold that this would happen. Private revelations have said this thing as well. Bishops at the time of Pius X said the same thing. Bishops in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, cardinals, so forth, talked about how we are in a time of a super heresy. And if you're in a time of a super heresy, all bets are off. Paul VI, the overseer of the destruction of the liturgy. He talked about the church being in a state of auto-destruction, as in she was destroying herself. That's really bad. Probably the worst it's ever been. He talked about, the smoke of Satan entering into the temple of God, into the sanctuary. Again, this is not the opinion of some guy on the internet. This is the opinion of the popes. And why the popes after the council and during the council didn't do anything to stop it, well, it's another, I don't know. I don't know why people do what they do. But the fact is that it happened. So without precedent is key. He continues. Archbishop Lefebvre must be seen as a holy man, not as a schismatic! As a fervent missionary and confessor of the faith, a zealous defender of tradition, the priesthood, and the Catholic Mass, he exposed himself to severe sanctions, up to and including excommunication, because he felt that it was more right to obey God than man, to guard and transmit tradition rather than embrace modernist doctrines. His life is marked by piety, a spirit of sacrifice, a sense of duty, a righteousness of conscience, and a great inner consistency. His is a life given to God and the church, devoted to the service of souls, to evangelization, to the teaching and preaching of sound doctrine, to the celebration of the holy sacrifice, and to the formation of young men called to the priesthood. A life that is entirely a witness to the solidity and the faith handed down to us by the apostles, the pontiffs, the councils, and the holy doctors of the faith, and for which the martyrs shed their blood. Some consider the 1988 consecrations as a step too far. That's what I said. Others recognize a vital necessity for the safeguarding of the Mass of all time. Archbishop Lefebvre grasped the urgency of the times in which we live and the drama of a situation that has worsened and taken on new accents of gravity in recent years, making more evident the state of exception in which we find ourselves. Some speak of disobedience. We speak of fidelity. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre continued to teach and do what the Holy Church has always done and taught. He opposed liberalism, the destruction of the Mass, and of the whole liturgical edifice of the Church, the ruin of the priesthood, of the religious life, and of Christian morals. I repeat, some speak of disobedience. We speak of fidelity. He's speaking maybe in Italian or whatever, Latin language as a bishop. When you say noi or nu, it's sort of a formal thing. So this is not just, Vigano saying, we as this general amorphous thing. He's saying himself, we speak this way. So there you have it. I don't know if there's anything more in here about Lefebvre. I'm just going to check quickly here. I believe that was the main. No, that was it. Okay, so that's the meat of it, where he talks about Marcel Lefebvre. And I want to just get back to where he talks about Archbishop Lefebvre understood the need to form the priests. You don't have a Catholic religion without priests. You don't have a faith without a liturgy. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, for one, normally speaking, you can't go to heaven without sacraments, and you can't get sacraments without priests. People might say, well, that's not fair. I don't care. It's not the way I made it. It's the way Christ made it. Christ is God. It's fair enough. There are exceptions to being saved with exceptional means. These are exceptions. And these and you know, does someone have a perfect act of contrition? I don't know. These are things we can't know. Okay. Invincible ignorance. God only knows this stuff. We never know. We can only go by the normal means. The exceptions don't degrade the normal means. Just like all exceptions, they prove the rule. Okay. The speed limit is 80 kilometers an hour, except when you're driving your pregnant wife to the hospital to deliver a baby. And the cop says, no problem, I'll lead you there. The exception proves the rule. Okay. Someone like Marcel Lefebvre is exceptional. And his life is a life of exceptionality that proves the rule. The fact that he had to go to the lengths that he did to form priests proves the necessity of the priests as the normal means. Okay. I don't think, you know, I was one time having a conversation with someone about the Society of St. Pius X. And this is a faithful Catholic man. And I was saying that, you know, the SSPX serves, because these estimates are from about 10 years ago, so they've probably greatly risen. But the estimates a few years, 7 to 10 years ago, were something like 650 to 800,000 people a week were served by the SSPX worldwide, whether that was mass, you know, extreme unction, confessions, whatever. Well, since lockdown, many chapels will tell you this. I know our chapel's basically doubled. And obviously tradition continues to grow. It's probably over 1 million people now every week around the world are being served by the SSPX in some capacity. And I remember talking to this man and he said, well, that's, you know, that's such a small percentage of the church. Basically, we were having this conversation about whether or not the SSPX was good or not. And this idea that they served 1 million people, it's like, well, that's great, but, you know, there's a lot more Catholics than just 1 million. That's not the way to look at it. You know, numerous saints have said Christ would do the whole thing over again if it was for one soul. The missionaries would go into Western Canada and the Great Lakes region and spill their blood and be tomahawked to death and die of, you know, exposure and frostbite and torture for one soul. Every single soul. This is what Scripture tells us. The shepherd leaves the flock for the one and leaves the 99. Okay. The Father rejoices at one prodigal son. Okay. This is pastoral. This is what Archbishop Lefebvre understood. And you can see this perfectly when you, and I don't have it on hand right now. It's over my bookshelf over there. But if you look at there's a book called Archbishop Lefebvre in the Vatican. And I recommend you get this book. And in this book, it's all of the correspondence between Rome and Marcel Lefebvre leading up to the consecrations and a little bit after. Okay. And it goes through the correspondence with the actual documents and then commentary from a canon law expert on what these things actually mean. And there's a point where basically Archbishop Lefebvre is in negotiations with the Vatican, and it's Ratzinger and John Paul II. Usually it's John Paul II through Ratzinger. And there's one point where they, and I can't remember if it's the Pope saying it or if it's Ratzinger or another cardinal saying on behalf of the Pope, etc. But anyway, it's in there. And the conversation is basically, there are thousands of weddings that have taken place since the 1970s. This is 15 years after. This is 18 years after the SSPX was formed, 17 years or so. Thousands of weddings have taken place, and for a time, things have been irregular. So basically, we're not sure of the validity of those marriages. That's a canon law absurdity because it's actually very easy to have a valid marriage. You just have to have witnesses. But anyway, nonetheless, the idea was, if you do this for us, then we'll recognize that those weddings are valid. Now, we have become so desensitized to what a true shepherd would act like that doesn't seem like a big deal to a lot of us. But when I remember reading that, I almost dropped the book. I was so shocked. And here's why. If the head of, because this is Ratzinger and John Paul II, and then perhaps it was another cardinal, but the point is, this is the official delegation between Lefebvre and Rome. If the highest positions in Rome, the Pope, head of the CDF, whatever, if they look at the state of marriages and they're willing to use those as a negotiation piece, what does that mean? It means that it means two things at least that are extremely damning. On the one hand, It could mean that they're not actually concerned with the state of those marriages because they know that they're valid. They're just using it as a bargaining chip, which is a very dishonest way of arguing or negotiating, which shows that Rome was acting in bad faith. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it, they knew they were actually doubting their validity, but they were willing to have the marriages remain invalid and then technically mean that the couples were fornicating and therefore committing mortal sins. And they weren't concerned whether or not their souls would be damned. And this is the fundamental disconnect that people don't understand when they speak about the Society of St. Pius X. It drives me nuts. The supreme law of the church is the salvation of souls. That's it. If you profess the doctrines of the church, if you profess fidelity to the magisterium of all time, if you pray for the local ordinary and the Pope and so on and so forth, you are not in schism. You might be someone they don't like, but you're not in schism. And if there are ever souls in the balance, it doesn't matter what's going on, but the shepherd leaves the 99 and goes and finds the one. And the shepherd who did that was Marcel Lefebvre. And the shepherds who were willing to do the opposite of that, to stay with the 99 and not worry about the one, were those in Rome, including Archbishop or Cardinal Ratzinger and John Paul II. This is just a historical fact. If they believed that the weddings were actually invalid, then they were recognizing that their souls were in danger of eternal hellfire, and they were willing to use their salvation as a negotiating tool with the bishop. That is absolutely insane. And if you don't grasp that, then you don't understand the point of the church. If you don't grasp that, you don't understand the point of the priesthood. And we can't communicate, because the church is not about the salvation of souls for you, if that's the case. The church is it's a social club. It's the privileged path, like Bishop Barron would say. But it's not the ark or the bark of Peter. It's not the ship that gets you there, that you at least have to be hanging on to, or at least trying to get onto in order to be saved. If you don't believe that, then you don't believe Catholicism, to be honest, ultimately, because there's no salvation outside the church. It doesn't matter everything else you believe. It doesn't matter how many theological degrees you have. It doesn't matter how many podcasts you listen to. If you don't see the church through that lens, and you think that you can subordinate the salvation of souls to the canonical norms of the church, then you don't believe Catholicism. That's a fact. You believe something that looks like Catholicism, but you don't believe it. Archbishop Lefebvre was a Catholic through and through. He believed Catholicism to the point where he was willing to go through a martyrdom for that and be persecuted and excommunicated, which is a legal thing and not a salvation thing. He knew he was willing to go through that in order to save your soul. He wanted to save your soul, Marcel Lefebvre. Rome was willing to let tens of thousands of souls potentially be damned to prove a political point. And if you find yourself in a state like this, then Archbishop Vigano is exactly correct. And it is the fact that Archbishop Lefebvre was willing to go to his passion as a white martyr in the church that proved his fidelity to the church against the infidelity of those who were in the positions of authority. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel. Click the links in the description to see how you can help us grow. My books are for sale. Also, new affiliate we have. If you like smoking good cigars, click the link in the description for Mombacho Casa Favili cigars. They're actually run by a good Catholic man. I know him. The cigars are incredible. I smoke dozens of cigars a month. I love them. And they're some of the best I've ever had. And I've traveled to Cuba 3 times. Being Canadian, we can go back and cross. There's no embargo, that sort of thing. And I've had cigars direct from the Cohiba factory. I saw them be made, buy them in the gift shop. I like me some cigars. And these Casa Favili Mombacho cigars, they're from Nicaragua. They're some of the best cigars I've ever had in my life. If you buy those in the description, use the coupon code Kennedy, and you'll actually get a discount. And a little bit goes kickback to help this channel. So if you're going to smoke cigars, support a good Catholic business. And Catholics in Nicaragua are being heavily persecuted. So that's actually doubly important to help them out down there. So this has been the Kennedy Report. And until next time, God bless.